Tilapia isn't the only species caught in the policy crossfire. Groundfish, particularly cod and haddock, are facing their own mix of tariffs, sanctions, and supply disruptions, fundamentally reshaping pricing. Let's get into groundfish. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, so specifically, I'll speak to cod and haddock here, where tariffs, supply constraints, and geopolitical pressures have combined to drive some of the strongest price movements that we've seen across any seafood category this year. I will start with single frozen product from Iceland. Iceland's a strategic supplier that's under pressure. You can see here, I've got both cod and haddock. Cod's in blue and haddock is in green. Prices began sharply rising at the end of 2024 and never looked back. On a year-to-date basis, Icelandic cod in blue is now trading over $3 per pound higher than this time last year. And that's largely driven by a severe supply shortage with added support from Iceland's 10% tariff. So Iceland is one of the primary suppliers of single frozen Atlantic cod to the US, but it's also supplying into high demand markets in the UK and the EU, limiting what's available for the US buyers. On top of that, the Barents Sea quota was reduced by 25% this year, with early signals suggesting another 21% reduction next year. Russia, historically a major cod source, remains banned from the US market, and Chinese processed cod is at risk of higher tariffs, adding costs and uncertainty there. So this isn't so much a demand-driven rally, it's supply and tariff positioning story here. With Russia banned and China penalized and quotas tightening, Iceland's become one of the few viable sources left, and that's why we're seeing these record price levels. Unlike cod, Iceland actually increased its haddock quota for the 2025-2026 season, but prices still climbed. We've seen volatile auction prices in Iceland. There's rising operational costs. There's strong pull from European buyers. Plus, as cod became too expensive for some buyers, demand flowed into haddock, lifting prices in its wake. So cod set the ceiling, haddock is pulled up behind it, and tariffs are amplifying that upwards pressure, limiting alternatives. Now, looking at twice frozen, and you see that same trend. Tariff volatility has added another layer of complexity here. We've got ongoing tariff uncertainty throughout the year, causing US importers to delay or pull back on orders, and that's disrupting the natural flow or the normal flow of shipments into the US. Some processing has shifted out of China to alternative countries, resulting in bottlenecks, higher freight costs, and longer lead times. And despite all of this, demand has remained intact. The prices have continued to firm as buyers prioritize security of supply here. Now, twice frozen haddock faces a major policy turning point. We have two forces at play in twice frozen haddock that could significantly reshape the market going into 2026. The first is the Section 301 tariff exemption. Currently, haddock enjoys an exemption under Section 301 tariffs, but that exemption is only extended through the end of November. If it expires, we could see an additional 25% applied on top of the existing duty on Chinese product. And the second is the Marine Mammal Protection Act that's effective January 1st of 2026. NOAA is expected to enforce a ban on finished haddock products made from Russian raw materials, even if it's processed in China. This will effectively close one of the last remaining loopholes for Russian haddock entering the US. So if both those events go into effect, the US could lose a critical supply stream at the same time tariffs increase, creating one of the tightest haddock markets we've seen in a really long time.
All right, Lorin, you know how this stuff changes by the minute, and as soon as we sort of write our stories and get our stuff together.
Was there an announcement while I was going through that?
Yeah, this morning there was we had the story. Apparently, China has a trade deal that'll bring tilapia tariffs down to, I think, 45%. But we'll have to get more on that. I mean, we were jamming to get this thing together, and That story broke literally this morning. And this is what it's like to be an undercurrent news reporter. Like every 5 minutes, it seems like there's a new truth social post or something, and we've got to jump on it. It keeps changing.
Well, it'll be in my write-up tomorrow on the blog. So
yes, I'm sure you'll get on top of that. So, all right. So, following that last conversation, which market should we be watching most closely over the next 60 days?
Out of all of those, well, haddock for sure. Haddock's got a lot of things up against it, yeah, I would be watching closely to haddock. As cod prices have risen, haddock has been more of a focus as a substitution. But because of all that, because of the trade policy, the MMPA, those prices could be in line with where cod is if all those go into effect and demand stays where it is. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that.
This is kind of a broader question. Are these tariff impacts temporary noise, or are we looking at a longer term shift? What is the, will we have scars from this going into the future? What's
Don't we already?
Yeah.
There's definitely long-term shifts building because of the tariffs. Prices in some cases can be quicker to rise, and then a little bit slower to fall, especially at the retail level. There's more diversification. We're seeing processing kind of, being built up outside of China, sourcing from different origins. So tariffs are definitely making the industry more agile, but it's not without its growing pains.
All right. My favorite topic, and one of your favorite topics, is scallops. How have the scallop markets reacted? Product from Japan, Peru, China. Are we seeing anything different there?
So the scallop market is kind of similar to groundfish, where there's just supply constraints across the origins, and tariffs are just adding another layer of upwards pressure to that. There's limited landings here on the domestic front. There's constraints out of Canada. There's constraints out of Japan. There's, China has, all the tariff uncertainty there. There's some, a little bit better positioning out of Peru. But, there's, in the grand scheme of things, it's majorly driven by supply issues on the scallop front.
Okay. Last question for you. Given the rising costs we've seen on imported products, has there been any impact on domestic species like Pacific cod?
Yes, absolutely. So the rising costs on imported species, we've definitely seen increased interest in tariff-safe domestic alternatives like Pacific cod. That added demand combined with tighter raw material availability, higher production costs, that has helped lift Pacific cod pricing this year. Not to the levels of Atlantic cod, but we're seeing those same trends.
Okay.